Alright, welcome to our American Studies look at English and its ties to Greek and Latin roots. You could certainly take an entire course on this, probably called linguistics or something like that, but for the purposes of our freshman English class, this short PowerPoint will suffice to get us started thinking about some of the things in English and as they tie to some older languages. So one thing to start looking at is the idea of language changing, and we're at a pretty exciting point right now because we have so many more words being added at such a rapid pace because of all the new technologies that are out there. And at some point somebody has to name these things, and so as new items are invented, people are creating names for them, and then these new names become words. As you'll see on the next slide, we get some pretty common words now that didn't exist a couple years ago. Something else to think about is that second point there, that as language grows older, it becomes grammatically less complex. And one example of this is who and whom with an M. There is a difference. There's a grammatical difference. There's a usage difference. But oftentimes, as we have continued to just move forward in terms of other things, language itself has kind of dropped off and people care less and less about it. So you can almost use who for everything, and other than the stickler English teacher in the back, most people aren't probably going to realize that whom should have been used or something like that. And the third one down at the bottom is political power determines the prestige of a language or a dialect. And we've used this example in class before when talking about dialect, but think about it this way. How many national news anchor people have accents? Few to none, if any. You know, if you're watching news from Atlanta, Georgia, they probably sound like they're from Georgia. If you're watching it, you know, local news in Texas, they probably sound like they're in Texas. But as they move from that local area up into the national news realm, the idea is we want to see people with no accents, not speaking with dialect, speaking this standard sort of American English, as that appeals to most people. And related to this, I think we shared this when we were talking about dialect in class also. There was a situation where they asked a group of actors to play this character as kind of dumb, so not very intelligent. And with almost 100% accuracy, all of those actors chose to read the script at this audition in a Southern accent. And so just because you're from the South doesn't mean that you're stupid by any means at all, but for whatever reason, popular opinion of a Southern accent is that it's a little less than savory, I guess. So here's some examples, some new words in English. You know, before like 1984, something like that, the idea of a mouse was simply that furry rodent that ran around. But as computing systems evolved and the need to interact with them increased, and we moved from just a typing keyboard to a pointing device, the word mouse shifted from just a rodent into a computer thing. Then you can see some other ones down there. You know, Xerox we use to mean to copy, regardless of the brand of the machine that you're using. It always means, you know, hey, go Xerox that. You know, go ahead and use it on the Minolta or the Fuji or the Samsung copier. But Xerox has moved from a brand name, which used to be the first company to really get the idea of photocopying things, to a verb, meaning copy. And then the one down there, Google, you know, before '06 and the company's development, it didn't really mean anything. But then as Google became the premier search engine at the time, now we just say, you know, hey, go Google that. And we mean look it up on the internet, regardless of which engine you're using there. Those linguistic language maps, and try to figure out where English comes from. And English is pretty much a mutt language, meaning it's coming from a lot of different places and varieties. But you can see one stem, the one that kind of goes straight down, that italic strain that kind of spreads into the Latin base. And then if you go down farther from there, you can see the languages that you're probably familiar with that have grown from Latin, Portuguese, Spanish, French, Italian. We get a lot of our language from Latin-based words, and we'll talk about why in a little bit. And then towards the middle left, you see this Germanic tradition where you get Old, Middle, and then Modern English on the left-hand side. So English comes from a strong combination of Latin and German, but there's also a lot of influence from Arabic, from Greek, and from any other languages that are out there, because English seems to be very fluid. It accepts new words pretty quickly, whereas more traditional languages like pure Spanish or pure Italian doesn't have the ability to add new words like Google or something like that. So when they do need to use those words, which they do because they Google things in these other places and languages, they simply adopt the English version of Google. So like we mentioned, a lot of our language comes from the Romance languages. And when we say Romance, we don't mean like, writing a love letter to a boyfriend or a girlfriend or something. We mean from Rome. And at the time, the Roman Empire was speaking Latin. And so you see a lot of close connections between these 5 given languages: French, Italian, Portuguese, Spanish, and interestingly, Romanian, which geographically doesn't cover the same area as French, Italian, Spanish, Portuguese, kind of that southern European area, where Romanian is more north or northeastern European. But a lot of these languages are quite similar, and so as you learn one of them, you're able to recognize words or phrases, even structures in some of the others because they are so closely related. For example, if we look at numbers, look at number 2 down there. So 2 in English is 2. In Spanish, it's dos. In French, it's deux. And that's pretty close. You can see the 3 is pretty close. The 4, the cuatro in Spanish, the quatre maybe in French. I don't know. And same in with number 5. You see the German doesn't really match that pattern. And so you can see that our numbers have come from the Latin-based Spanish, French, Italian, where we have other German influences coming in our language. And so how did Latin get everywhere, and how did that change? Here is a picture of the Roman Empire when it was at its height. And so you can see right here we have Rome. And so as it expanded out in through what's now Italy, they definitely moved north and west towards Gallia, which is now France, Hispania, which is Spain, Germania you could see up there. That's kind of where they were stopped. But then in the far northwest, all the way up into what becomes Britain. And so all the while Roman army people are moving, they're bringing their customs and culture and their language. And so as the Roman Empire conquers this area, which at the time was a massive area, they bring their language with them. And with time, not just overnight or but a couple generations, we start to see the languages spoken by the people there mixing with the Latin. And so words start to change, structures change, and they kind of play off of each other, and we get this mixing. And so that's where you see this tie back to Latin from Spanish, French, etc. And so here's where we kind of get the Germanic, or the influence from Germany. We get here's a picture of Britain, eventually Great Britain, in the left-hand side of this picture, and you can see over on the right we get kind of some Germanic influence from the Angles and the Saxons. And so as they came and invaded England, or what becomes England, They're bringing, of course, their language and their structures and the way they describe things along with their culture. And so the language that was there in Britain mixes with what the invaders bring over generations, and so that slowly changes. And since we know that early settlers to America came from England, they of course brought their language with them, and it continues to change and become less complex, and continues to accept new words as they come about. So we get this idea of affixing or affixing in modern English. And so basically what we mean is we're going to get a root, as in numer. This is a pretty self-identifying root. It has to do something with numbers. Okay, so then if you were to take that and start to add affixes, which are things that go on to the end or the beginning, you start to see how words can grow. So a numeral, numer is a root. AL lets us know that a numeral is just simply a number. But as we change these, we get numerality, numerally, numerant, numerous, numerously, numerical, and a numerist. And so we can get a good ballpark definition of any of these words because we know the root of numer means number, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 type thing. So if we can learn a couple roots and then some affixes, some things that get stuck on there, we can figure out a whole mess of words. For example, look at that last one, numerist. We've seen ist before, as in artist, dentist, machinist, something like that. And the pattern amongst all those words is that ist means a person who does. So an artist is a person who does art. A machinist is a person who works on machines. Therefore, you can figure out if numer means number and ist means person who does. A ballpark meaning of numerist is a person who does numbers. And that's what we're getting at. So what does all this mean for us as freshmen? And here's kind of the key. We're going to be looking at affixes. And you can see the definition there. These are little groups of letters that affix or attach to word roots. And what's cool about all of this is that roots and affixes maintain their meaning throughout most words. So if you know that numer means number, whenever you see numer as a true root in a word, you can get a ballpark figure to know that that word has something to do with numbers. Another example might be sub, as in a submarine, or that is substandard, or a substitute, that type of thing. Sub will always mean under. So if you see that as its own little unit, as its own little affix, you can get a ballpark figure again of something with sub in it means that something is under something else. Okay, so here's 3 big terms we'll need to know. Roots, they serve as the base of words. Prefixes are those affixes that go before roots, so as in like sub or re, as in redo the homework, reheat the dinner. And then we also have suffixes, and these are affixes that attach at the end of words, such as ist or or, a doctor, somebody who does something like that. Okay, so we have roots, kind of the main chunk of a word, the prefixes attached to the beginning of those, while suffixes attached to the end. And all of these maintain their meaning. So you're not going to get sub all of a sudden meaning on top of. It's just not going to happen. If you know that sub means under, whenever you see sub, that word will always mean under. So that's it. I think that covers a good amount of stuff for us to kind of get us into the Greek and Latin roots. As always, if you have any questions, give us a call. If not, we'll be using this tomorrow. Thanks.